Greetings from Miller Park in Milwaukee. I'm Greg Hofer. My next guest is a former Cal Golden Bear, pitched professionally 9 seasons. He was a pitching coach for the Reds, the Diamondbacks, and the Mariners, currently in his 3rd season as the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. He is Bryan Price. Bryan, thanks very much for joining us here today.
You bet, Greg.
I want to start kind of at the beginning. Growing up, Northern California, what was it like growing up there? Obviously, that's where your love of baseball must have started.
Yeah, you know, I was really fortunate because my parents got married, started having children, and moved into a small community, a small town called Mill Valley, which is north of San Francisco. And it was kind of a sleepy little town at the base of Mount Tamalpais. And it was an idyllic place to grow up. Small town feel. And just, it was, you walked everywhere, you biked everywhere. And I grew up in a neighborhood full of kids that liked playing baseball, and we'd go down to the schoolyard and play and bang balls around and just enjoyed the competition, enjoyed the camaraderie. And it was just a perfect place to grow up. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for youth sports there. Nothing over the top, but a lot of fun.
How do you end up after high school? You go to become a Golden Bear. You actually had a very successful career at Cal, team captain, MVP. How do you end up at Cal?
Well, it's a funny thing that, I got a letter from the athletic director at Cal, Dave Maggard, after I had thrown a no-hitter in a championship game as a sophomore in high school. And he sent me a note. It was just a note of congratulations. I'm going, how do I get something from a college? I'm a sophomore in high school, At the time, I don't think colleges were recruiting sophomores. And it wasn't a recruitment letter. It was just a congratulatory letter. But it planted the seed, in the Cal letterhead, the blue and gold. And so as I finished up my junior year and a lot of the recruiting stuff begins, I always had that in the back of my mind, and Cal stayed kind of as a constant force in the recruiting process. And when push came to shove, it was relatively close to home, so I knew my parents could come over and watch me play. It was in what I felt at the time was the best baseball conference in the world. That was the Pac-10, and we considered it the six-pack because we didn't play the northern schools. And so that meant that you got to play against Arizona State and USC, Stanford, UCLA, Arizona, etc. And I really enjoyed that combination of things. And they also, my freshman year was 1981. In 1980, Cal finished 3rd in the country and went to the World Series and placed 3rd there and lost to the eventual winner, Cal State Fullerton. So anyway, it was, University of Arizona. But it was they made a pretty impressive mark on me.
So growing up, you grew up in the 70s, a lot of great pitching arms in the 70s. Guys like Steve Carlton, Ron Guidry, of course, Nolan Ryan. In the Bay Area, had Catfish Hunter, Vita Blue. Who were some of the guys that you looked up to as a kid growing up?
Well, from a pitching standpoint, my first love was I loved to hit. I loved to move around. I mostly played first base, a little bit of outfield. The pitching stuff kind of took off a lot more as I got into high school. But for me, from a pitching standpoint, there was 2 guys, Vita Blue and Juan Marichal, and both had the bigger delivery, the big leg kick, very stylish. You could walk into a ballpark anywhere not knowing who was pitching, and if it was Vita Blue or Juan Marichal, you could sever their heads and look at the delivery and know exactly who was pitching, and I really enjoyed that. The only setback to that whole thing is that they had big deliveries that were harder to control. They could master it, but it was harder for me. So it wasn't quite as easy to settle into that big delivery as I matured as a pitcher.
Now, after your Cal Berkeley, you get drafted actually 3 different times, the Twins, the Orioles, and the Angels. Ultimately, you sign with the Angels. 1985, you play for manager Joe Madden. What do you remember about that year and playing for him? Obviously, he's gone on to some pretty impressive credentials as he's moved along in his career.
Yeah, he sure has. And the thing about Joe that I think is constant is that he's approachable and positive, and I think the thing that connects people is knowing what their expectations are for you in a leadership position, and knowing that you can approach them when you have questions or things that you want to know to help you become a better player, knowing they're in your corner. They want you to do well, not just selfishly so they do well and that they have success as managers or coaches, but they really sincerely want you to do well and develop as a player. And I always felt that about Joe. He was sensational in that way, and he made us all comfortable. And it could make us uncomfortable every now and again if we weren't getting the job done.
Pitching in the 80s, when you were pitching as opposed to now, how has it evolved and changed?
Well, there's so much more. There's so much more data. There's so much more scrutiny. You know, the thing is everyone's held accountable now for injuries, and so we really look hard at pitch counts and innings and how our pitchers are developed as far as workload goes in particular, long toss regimens, what type of work they do in the gym, what their off-season training is all about. There's a lot of things have changed. The other part is, and from a youth perspective, is baseball really is a year-round sport, and I don't know if that's the best thing. You know, I think that there's something to be said for, you know, for people or kids playing seasonal sports and taking a break, especially pitchers taking a break from throwing year-round.
Yeah, the Tommy John surgeries, I mean, they're at an alarming rate now, and I think it can be traced back to that youth level and just pitching nonstop. I mean, your arm is just not equipped, especially at that age.
Well, those are some of the things we're finding out, you know, and I know the hardest thing to do when it comes to pitching and throwing is how much is too much, and is it workload over a short period, like throwing a bunch of pitches in one game? Is it workload over the course of a 9 or 10 or 11 month youth season, even though you may throw fewer innings and fewer pitches, but there's that constant of having to go out there and pitch constantly throughout the course of time without getting a break. Those are the things we're trying to put our fingers on, and I can't say that there's failure. I just don't know if baseball has decided that they've come to any conclusions that apply to everybody. You know, what's the right training? What's the right long toss? How much should you throw? How long should a season be? How long should the breaks be? What type of body fat? You know, how much body fat should you have on your body? Should you do any there's certain types of lifting things that we shouldn't be doing that we currently are? A lot of questions still.
The one thing I've noticed, I think there's a lot more power arms in the big leagues these days. You know, velocity seems to be all the rage. You know, there's a radar gun in every ballpark, and you know, is that a good thing from a manager's perspective? I mean, the velocity and the power arms and all that kind of stuff.
I think a lot of the concern is that the velocity is that kids are finding that top end velocity so early in their young lives, and that you're seeing kids in high school that are consistently throwing 95 and above, some kids that are throwing as high as 100 or better at that age, and maybe the body's not developed enough yet to handle that type of power. I think that might be one of the bigger questions. The other part for me, and you know, being really a pitching coach at heart, is that my biggest concern is that the kids don't learn. The kids that can overpower don't learn how to pitch. They don't learn the importance of a changeup. They don't learn the importance of bottom of the zone command, especially with a little bit of movement. They don't understand quite as much as they should the importance of being able to go side to side with their, you know, with the fastball. Pitching is an art, adding and subtracting, moving the ball around the zone, getting ahead so you can make the plate bigger. Those are things that are hugely important, and I think the big velocity sometimes is very seductive, not just to the pitchers but to the coaches. So you see a kid that's having success, and you don't see ultimately, if they get to the higher levels of minor league baseball or the collegiate level or to the major leagues, that they're going to need to be able to pitch, and meaning command their stuff, change speeds, and compete in that way.
Now, from a youth perspective, you've got fastball, changeup. As you see it, when would you recommend starting to learn breaking balls, sliders, curveballs, that kind of stuff, because of that stress that it puts on an underdeveloped arm?
Yeah, you know, that's always been a hard one for me to say, because pitching is my area of expertise, but the biology, the physicality of it is I think falls under the better people to decide, make those decisions are the doctors. And I know we talk a lot about the growth plates and the closing of the growth plates, and that takes place at different times in the human body. It might be 16, it might be 18, it might be a little bit later. However, I know that I threw a breaking ball starting when I was about 15 years old. That doesn't mean that it's right. It was okay for me. I never felt like I came back and said, boy, I blew my arm out. When I was 15, even though I was a relatively healthy pitcher until I got into professional baseball. I don't know for sure. I don't think I would start anybody until they were at least 16, 17 years old throwing the breaking pitch.
In a pitcher, what comes first? Is it confidence that brings success, or is it success that brings confidence?
That's another one of those questions that I don't know if I'll be able to answer, because I know that when you have some success, it breeds success. And I can relate that to myself in the sense that I remember I was kind of a late bloomer. I didn't get really into sports until I was a little bit older, till I was about 10 years old. A lot of kids are starting baseball when they're 5, 6, 7, and playing t-ball and stuff like that. I didn't really start till I was 10. So the kids that I was playing with were a little bit more developed than I was, and I had a really poor first season in organized baseball. The next year I went and we started playing a little bit, and I hit a couple balls hard before the fences were up in Little League for, hit some balls over the outfielders' heads. And it made all the difference in the world in how I saw myself as a baseball player. Hey, I can do this. I'm not as bad as I'm telling myself I am. I think that makes a big difference. I think tasting success certainly builds the confidence of the player.
When you're putting together scouting reports and you're a pitcher facing a hitter, I love the one-on-one battle. It's a great team sport, but within that, there's that one-on-one battle. When you're putting together a scouting report, do you pitch to the pitcher's strengths, or do you pitch to the hitter's weaknesses?
Well, you try to find how many of those you pair together. How many if a particular hitter really struggles with the breaking ball, does your pitcher have either a curveball or a slider that will allow him to compete, or when the game is really on the line, be able to flood the zone with that particular pitch that you feel most confident to get the hitter out with. More importantly, and most importantly, is that the pitchers have to throw pitches they can execute. And they have to get on the same page with the catcher. The catcher plays such a vital role in this, because the catcher cannot call a game based on what the hitter is going to struggle with. He has to be able to look at the game and know that a pitcher can execute a particular pitch or series of pitches that will improve the probability of retiring the hitter. And that's without question the most important. If you have a pitcher throwing differently in a different fashion, then he's comfortable throwing pitches he's not used to executing to try to find his outs, he'll definitely struggle.
And lastly, the one thing I wanted to ask, defensive shifts, where do you see that going in terms of, is it going to get bigger and bigger in baseball? It seems like it is, and it's really become a big, important part of the game now.
Yeah, and
it really affects pitching.
Well, it does. I think the first thing that happened was when teams started to shift, you'd have a pitcher out there and a guy would hit a slow roller that would go through the left side or the right side of the infield when there was nobody there, and the pitcher would get so upset. It wasn't until you could show them all the data of how many hits they took away because of the shift that pitchers really started to buy into it. And that's why I think you're seeing more and more teams that are really selling out with the defensive shifts, because the pitchers are now much more on board than they were a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's almost with every team you play, there's a certain degree of significant shifting that we never saw 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. So it plays a vital role. I think it will change the game in a lot of ways. I think it'll force offensive players, hitters, to have to utilize the bunt. I think we're going to have to get back to understand that hitting is also an art form, just like pitching. It can't be all about pulling the baseball and pulling extra base hits and homers. Because you're going to find that there's too many places where you're going to be able to situate the defense. If you don't hit the ball out of the ballpark, you're going to be out. And so I think the game always punches and counter punches. The punch right now to the hitters is the defensive shifting, and the punch back or the return fire from the hitters is going to be the ability to start to utilize the entire field again, like we used to see back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
But it really does put a lot more pressure on pitch execution, because the shift only works if you execute your pitches.
It does, and it does. And the thing that we find, however, is that when you look at a hitter and you go, okay, well, 87% of his ground balls are going to be on the right side of second base. That's taking into account all the pitches he's seen, hard, soft, inside, outside, up and down. And he's still hitting 87% of the time he's hitting a ball on the ground. If he hits it on the ground, it's going to go to that portion of the field. So, you know, there's just certain things that you know now through all the data collection that's going on. So it's very easy to see where the guys are going to hit the ball. It's not solely based on being able to execute a pitch to that side of the plate that forces them to hit it there. It does improve the odds, though.
Well, I could talk for hours about pitching. I absolutely enjoy the conversation. Thank you very much for your time, Bryan.
All right, Greg.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
That was Bryan Price. Our thanks to Bryan for his time. I'm Greg Hofer from Miller Park in Milwaukee, saying thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.